Okay.
All right. Well, hey, you know what? In the world of live events, you never know what curveballs life's going to throw at you. So we're going to make this happen one way or another. Ladies and gentlemen, we got Michael Roberts here with me. He's tuned in on Zoom. So I'm going to be putting my phone up to the speaker here on the computer. You can let us know in the comments, by the way. That actually would be really helpful just on quality. Just let us know, can you hear him or not? Because really, that's the point here is we're just looking to get a message across that many probably have not heard before. So on that note, Michael, I know you can hear me on Zoom. Let me put my phone up to the speaker. And if you could just let our audience know a little bit about your background. I talked about your travel and a little bit about aviation, but just let us know, professionally and what do you do for a living?
Well, first of all, Adam, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to speak with this group. My background, most of my adult life has been in aviation in different capacities. I consider myself a guy that, keeps his eyes open and makes observations. And throughout my career, also paid close attention to aviation safety. My first professional role in aviation was as an air traffic controller. I was trained as an air traffic controller. I worked radar, which is a little bit different job than in the tower, giving the final clearance for people to land and take off and so on, and ground movements. But radar is more related to turns, out in space between various airports. I got out of that because that was also a role that I was in the military for. So I got out of the military. It wasn't my thing. I spent a few years outside of aviation doing a few different things, and then I ended up coming back in a sales role. And for the last 15 years, I've worked around aircraft, around helicopters, or parts, and consulting. And I've even at some point also been an expert witness on a couple of different issues regarding transactions, accidents, things like that. So I call myself an aviation consultant and an aviation generalist, and I've seen it from a few different sides. But just one thing to just be clear, I've never been a professional pilot, so there's certainly other roles other than pilot, but that's just one thing I never did.
Okay, love it. And also your website. I know you're getting this thing up and running, but it's good to see, especially just the direction this conversation's heading. But defeatingglobalism.com, that is your landing page, correct?
Yeah, thanks in part to you for encouraging me to have a place to put a first article, and I did do a brief post there with some what I call unanswered questions, and they're about 9/11 in this case.
Yeah, I love it. So guys, check it out, defeatingglobalism.com. As I mentioned, soon we'll be dropping a link in the thread here to check out Michael's website, as well as subscribe to ANCAP Radio updates. So thank you all for joining. Again, if you haven't hit the retweet button, go ahead and do it, and let's dive in. Reminder, by the way, before I forget, if you guys want to comment, raise your hand, make questions, comments, etc. throughout today's presentation, all you got to do is tap that request button at the bottom of the screen. We're happy to take callers. That's really the other focus we have here on ANCAP Radio. So Michael, take us back to 9/11 initially. Where were you, and what were your initial thoughts on that day?
That's a great question. And I think for most people, that's actually really easy to remember. In my case, definitely also. I was at the time, I was living in Japan, and I was working for a Japanese electronics company. I was outside of aviation those couple of years. And because of the time zone, I had come home from work and turned on the TV and saw the news on Japanese TV. My initial thoughts were kind of around what became the official story, and I didn't have any. I guess I didn't have any real doubt about it. Of course, it was a shocking moment, and later on, I learned that if someone is shocked, they're open to suggestion. So if there were parts of the story or all of the story that weren't true, it's very difficult to see those in a moment of extreme shock. That's my opinion today. There is one oddity, however, about living in Japan, and there are a few people that remember this, and the internet has changed quite a bit, and there used to be forums that don't exist anymore, and there used to be information that's sort of not around anymore, which kind of makes sense. People don't want to pay for servers to keep stuff forever, but the U.S. Embassy in Japan, in Tokyo, sent out 2 alerts prior to 9/11 warning Americans of an imminent attack on American interests in Asia. And also, 1 week before 9/11, U.S. bases in Japan were locked down, and foreign employees and foreign workers, which there's quite a few people that work on bases that are local citizens, weren't allowed on base. It was kind of a weird story that made the news. So those kind of things, those were oddities that always stuck in my mind. Like, why did that happen? What is it that they picked up on? Why did they say that there would be an attack on American interests in Asia, which obviously didn't happen? It was an attack on the U.S. So other than that, I would say my first impression was just it was what they said on TV.
Right, and then there had to be a point in time, as I was kind of referring to earlier, I'm not sure if you caught it, where you first heard somebody challenge the reality, if it wasn't you yourself at first. So when was that?
That's a great question. I don't remember. I would say in my personal case, it was a gradient over time. I had initial questions. There were things I would look into because I'm a curious person, and also because of my training as an air traffic controller. There might be. I'm not a professional 9/11 researcher. I haven't dedicated tens of thousands of hours, et cetera, like some people. But there would be things that would pop up, and for some reason, something would come into my mind. I might look into it a little bit, and then I might forget about it. So that would probably describe the first 10-ish years, after 9/11. And then say the next 10 years, I would consider myself more deeply questioning it. And then, of course, there's more and more material and more research, more and more sites, and more ways to chase down that rabbit hole, if you will.
Yeah, and from getting to know you, the one thing about your background that had immediately had me listening to your take on this is your background in aviation. I don't think it's not common that you get to talk to someone who knows the details of engines and radar and everything that you kind of told us about your background. When did you start putting your professional experience to use for the research of what really took place?
One of the first things that I was curious about, and I'll explain this in a simple way, not meant to make assumptions about what the audience does or doesn't know, but there's a couple different ways to identify an aircraft. So, in a commercial airline flight, you can just say, well, it's flight number whatever, right? So this was flight number 1, or as in the case of 9/11, flight 93, or flight, I believe one of them was 175, et cetera, et cetera. So you can identify a flight by a flight, but that doesn't tell you what physical aircraft it was. So the next question is, well, what aircraft, if there was a physical aircraft that crashed into something, which one was it? So there's 2 ways to answer that question. And it'd be, if you think about your car, if your car crashed into a tree, and I said, well, which car crashed into the tree? You have 2 ways of answering it specifically. One is, well, the VIN number of the car was, 1 A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera, et cetera. So that's basically a serial number of the car. And the other would be another way to answer it would be the registration. Well, the car that crashed was, that one over there with plate ABC 123 from Florida. So aircraft have a similar situation. So you have a registration, which in the U.S. starts with an N, and people call call it an N number. And on the radio, it's November. So it might be November 123 Mike Romeo. So my name is Mike Roberts. Maybe if I owned an aircraft, I'd call it Mike Romeo. So I registered with the FAA November 123 Mike Romeo, painted on the side of the aircraft, and that's the registration. But that aircraft also has a serial number, just like a car has a VIN number. So it's Boeing 737-800, serial number 12345. Right? So I looked up what were the N numbers of the aircraft involved. And there are some oddities. Now, these things don't necessarily mean something in and of themselves. And one of the things that I can talk about is just a personal belief of my own, if you want later, that when you are looking for information and you're looking for truth, you have to separate it from its implications, because the implications might bog you down or stop you or cause cognitive dissonance or otherwise be a path that you haven't completed looking for the facts before you determine what those facts indicate. So, and this is an example of that. This is information that is something that happened, or it's an oddity, and from that information, maybe there's different opinions on the implications. But so there's 4 aircraft allegedly involved in 9/11 that crashed, 2 into one of each of the main twin towers, and 1 allegedly crashed into the Pentagon, and 1 allegedly crashed into a field in Pennsylvania, right? So we all know that story. So all of those aircraft have an N number. So for several years, and this is in an era of my life that I didn't screenshot things or didn't think anything of, so it would just be an oddity in my brain and I'd move on. But for several years, all 4 of those aircraft had an active registration on the FAA. Again, what that implies, I don't know. Does it mean nobody wanted to touch it? Does it mean something else? Again, but that's a very weird situation. So then, after several years, again, I don't remember when, but this is commonly known in 9/11 truth communities, the FAA changed those pages. And when I say the pages, you can just search FAA N number lookup, and you can put in any aircraft you want, and you can see who owns it or how it's registered. So they changed them to say the FBI is handling this incident. So they just had a custom page for those. And that was a little bit odd too. Now today, if you look them up, you can go on Wikipedia. It tells you the N numbers of the 4 aircraft that are allegedly involved. And 2 of them say destroyed, and 2 of them say the registration was canceled in 2005. So again, what does that mean? It's very strange.
Right. And this might be fast forwarding a bit, but one other kind of, I felt, obvious example that you had mentioned when we were speaking was that the evidence that's been used to show the story that we're told by we'll just call it the corporate media. The engines were incorrect, right? Like an engine that had no business being in one of these planes was the one that was used as evidence. Could you just go deeper on that?
Okay, so that's a great question. This is another very well known and well documented oddity, if you want to call it, in that 9/11 truth seekers have found and pointed out, and it's regarding a news report. So on 9/11. News, and I don't remember or know which news, reported that there was an engine on one of the sidewalks in New York, which allegedly fell off a plane, after the crash. And it's like, see, there's an engine from an airliner. The problem is, anyone who has technical knowledge in aviation knows that it wasn't the right kind of engine. So, so I do have some people that, like I admitted, I didn't initially question it, but I know some people in aviation that have said from the day one they had a problem with the story because of that. So again, that opens up lots and lots and lots of questions. Who put that engine on the sidewalk? Was it really on the sidewalk? Was it a studio set? Did they just quickly grab an engine just to create a scene? Did something else crash into the side of the building that used a different engine? Because the airliners that allegedly crashed into the towers don't use that kind of engine. So on and on and on. You end up going. You can have 1 million questions just because it's the wrong kind of engine. And I'm going by memory, so this can all be looked up and verified, but I believe the engine that was on the sidewalk allegedly is called a CFM56, and it's not used in the 757 or 767. That's by memory, so I could be wrong on which way is wrong, but I think that was the case. And again, this is a well-known oddity in the story among many others, but and yeah, that's kind of where we're going with this in terms of this conversation is once you have certain things that you know can't be true, then where do you go to keep looking for the truth, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's where we want to go. You've gone pretty deep. Where are you going now to look for the truth as far as you've gone?
So let's say that I'm like I said, a non-professional. That's the first blog post I ever wrote about it. Was the one that you mentioned on defeatingglobalism.com. And the blog post, the orient of it is just here's some questions that have never been answered, and they're mostly about aircraft because I come from a perspective of I want to know what's going on with these particular 4 aircraft, right? Because I'm looking in the physical real world. These are 4 identifiable aircraft, and I have questions about where they are and what happened and why certain things didn't happen that should have happened, and that's the basis of those questions. From a personal standpoint, I would say as a consumer of alternate media, alternate blogs, I'm interested in different thinkers. I like to read, different books that come across. I've just always been mildly interested in this subject partly because of its implications. Well, because it was a big event, it changed the world, and because of its implications. But I've learned not to be obsessed over it because you can spend full time. You could spend 40 hours a week researching the subject, and some people have. I have great respect for the people that have dedicated their lives to finding the truth. But for me personally, I have to place a limit on how much time I can spend researching 9/11. So it's very little. But where has that taken me is just, I would say, to be open over the years to reading an article, to seeing something new, to watching an hour video, and putting pieces together to answer questions in my mind.
Nice. Good. From planes to trains, we got that going by you over there. By the way, Michael's website is in the thread below, guys. So if you haven't checked that out, go ahead and click it and subscribe to him. We're here live with Michael Roberts on ANCAP Radio, aviation expert, and we'll say seeker of truth in many regards, especially with 9/11. If you haven't already, hit the retweet button, hit the like button. Go ahead and give us a follow here on ANCAP Radio. And if you do have any questions or comments for Michael, as we make our way through here, get some feedback there. Could you mute that on your end, Michael? There we go. But yeah, if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to tap that request to speak button. We'd be happy to get you up here. One really powerful thing you shared with me, we'll just call it in the green room, was how getting a grasp or a sense of awareness for, we'll call it world events like this, can really help you fundamentally how you choose to live your life. You know where I'm going with this. If you could kind of just pick up the conversation from here. How do world events like this and understanding, or at least being aware of, looking at it through a different lens, impact your ability to live life?
How do you hear me now? Is that coming through clear?
Yeah, you're coming through fine. It was just some feedback, I think, from the browser.
Okay, great. That's a really wonderful question. And I think that it's a dangerous question. So let's just take 9/11 by itself without relationship to any other conspiracies. So if you believe the story that a group of hijackers took over planes and crashed these planes because they hate America and didn't have any reason in your life to ever question it, that story is going to most likely affect your worldview. So on a simplistic level, let's just say that this horrific event, if you believe the official story, then those people conspired. So that's a conspiracy theory. Those people conspired for perhaps religious reasons, since it was blamed on all Muslims. Since it was entirely blamed on Muslims, excuse me, then that might affect your worldview, and perhaps you would support certain U.S. wars, even if it wasn't quite clearly tied to this country or that country. I don't see any reason why somebody wouldn't say, yeah, let's go over there and kick some ass. Look what they did. But if you reach a point that you believe the story can't be true for whatever reason, then you might question the U.S. involvement in certain wars, or you might question the changes made to the U.S. law system or airports based on this story. So that'll put you on another side, and you can certainly lose friends or lose jobs, I guess, if you will, if it's that bad, if you push it or bring it up at your job, or you confront friends with it or something like that. So you end up, it's like I said, I think it's a dangerous question. And that could be on any big subject, but you end up on another side because you've looked into something or you've seen something and you didn't believe it. But the people who believe it are deeply emotionally affected by the story, because it is an emotional, moment or whatever, to realize the country's under attack. And so you're not challenging those people's intellect, you're challenging their emotion and their emotional response to the story. So it's very, very hard to get through to them.
Sure. And just want to remind everyone here as well, we are going to be going for about another 25 minutes here with Michael Roberts. His website is below. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And it is stories like this. I look back on my, my young journey here as an ANCAP, and it's the moments like this that you do remember being your first epiphany, maybe. So could you kind of tie, you talked about other, maybe how you perceive other world events or say U.S. involvement in other areas that maybe they should or shouldn't have been. Do you see, have any other world events that have taken place since 9/11 fallen into this category for you specifically, where you would say, like, man, this, something else is going on here? And if so, like, what other events would you relate this to?
In my opinion, 9/11 was an attack, not by necessarily a country, but certainly terrorist is good enough label for now. A group of people who wanted to install changes in society, changes in the law, changes in our policy. And I also look at it as a taking of territory, because what is the first thing you do if you take territory in a war or attack an enemy? The first thing you do is take over the airports. So this may be a stretch to some people to think this way, but I view the implementation of changes and adding new government administrations as the taking of territory. So a brand new government administration that didn't exist before was suddenly concocted. It's called Homeland Security, and it took over physical territory. So, again, just stepping one foot back and saying, what would you do if you were taking territory? Well, that's one way to take territory. Now, somebody might argue with me and say, oh, no, they just beefed up security and made some changes and so on. Well, fine. But there's an entirely new administration or a new agency controlled by new people with new laws, new rules, who physically controls the territory and the access down to the individual person, because remember, no-fly list came out at this time, of who is allowed to fly and who's not allowed to fly and when our airport is allowed to be open and not. So, regardless of the implications of that statement, territory was taken. Changes were made. Wars took place that a great deal of the public believed were related to 9/11, even though it was quite simple to find out that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, neither did Afghanistan as a nation. So does that sound like any other operation that was pulled on the U.S. and or the world? I think it's the same as COVID. I think the COVID operation was the same. I think it was more complex, but I think it's the same sort of problem, reaction, solution type of scenario. And I think they did much more with it than even with 9/11, even though 9/11 is a huge game changer.
Right. And the dynamic of the environment from 9/11 to COVID has changed, which I think is probably what led to more questioning of COVID immediately. And what I mean by that is the internet, right? And us being able to sit here with you and everyone tuned in today, the speed at which information can travel right now is kind of getting out of their control now. Sure, someone could probably at Twitter or whatever, or X.com, I guess it is, come in here and swoop this out swiftly if they wanted to. But normally stuff like that, when it happens, it draws more attention to what they're trying to get rid of. So one of the most obvious things you can bring to someone's attention with what's really going on at 9/11 is Building 7. And we haven't really talked about that yet. But I mean, what's your theory on Building 7's collapse?
Can I answer that by answering it in a different way?
Sure.
I want to answer it even more broadly. Any hole in the story or any aspect of the story that you, as an individual person, come to believe is impossible or that the story is a lie, is an opening to investigate the entire story. Right? So Building 7 I think, is the most famous route by which people who have come to believe the 9/11's official story is a lie got to that point. Because there's no image that we watched on TV of a airliner or airplane hitting Building 7, but at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or 5-something in the afternoon on 9/11, it collapsed into its own footprint. So it's another big, massive steel building, and it just sort of disintegrated into itself. So, of course, they have an answer for that, and, some things hit it, and some paper caught on fire, and maybe somebody left too many things out on their desk, and the whole building just collapsed. So, but if you don't believe that, then now, if you want, and I don't think anybody is obligated to think about these issues. If you want to live your life somewhere else, and you don't want to waste the mental time, and you just care about things that are closer to you, I don't fault that person. I fault the person who lies, or who is somehow involved, like, say, government officials, that came up with these explanations after the fact. That's a different level of deception than somebody that chooses to ignore it. But once that door is open, then for a lot of people, the entire story falls apart.
Couldn't agree more. And we do have our first caller here. I think we might even have a couple. We got to take a closer look. But yeah, Doug Casey, I see you're calling in here. So let us know where you're tuned in from and what your question for Michael is.
Yeah, I'm calling from the shores of the Chesapeake Bay in the U.S. But I was listening to what Michael's been saying, and it all makes sense to me. Other than, I don't want to just bring an opinion to this. I'd like to bring some firsthand factual data. It turns out that at a conference that I went to in December of that year, through an odd set of circumstances, believe me, they'd be odd because I don't hang out with these people, but I had lunch with Newt Gingrich, who, as you recall, was the ex-Speaker of the House and big Republican poobah. And it was just the two of us. So I'd never met the guy before, and we were just talking. And so since 911 was in the recent past, I asked him, well, what do you think about Building 7, Newt? And you know what his answer was? Well, I'll tell you what his answer was. What are you talking about? And I said, Building 7. That was the third skyscraper, 40, 45 stories that fell into its own footprint. And he said, I'd never heard about that. Here's the guy, leading Republican, Speaker of the House, 3 months after 911, and he'd never even heard that Building 7 collapsed. I don't think most people have, but it's particularly shocking that this guy in his position, I'm just telling you firsthand, I was the only other guy at the table, unfortunately, so nobody's around to verify it when he denies it if I bring it up in the future. It's shocking, the ignorance, the fact that this guy's obviously living in a bubble. He's living in a silo, and all he knows is what he's seen on television or heard from his handlers. Anyway, that's what I've got to say about it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm holding my my microphone up to, or excuse me, my speaker up to the computer mic for Michael to hear. So did you hear Doug's comments there, Michael? You want me to repeat them?
Yes, I did, and it's shocking. It's actually incredible that somebody at that level in the government wouldn't know, wouldn't have been told about a major part of that day.
Oh, no, I was completely shocked and still am to this day. But fortunately, I'm on a Zoom call that Newt shows up on every once in a while. And it would be rather impolitic for me to ask him that question from out of the blue. But just because I've got to find out what he says, I might ask him, well, did you ever find out about Building 7? And what did you think about it? And see if he vociferously denies his ignorance or that the conversation ever took place or what. But yeah, it's completely shocking. It's actually beyond belief.
Were you able to hear that, Michael?
Yes.
Yeah, so it looks like yes. Doug might bring it back up to him, and we'll see what he says. Well, thanks.
No comment.
Love it. Well, Michael, another thing you mentioned is there's an article or a book that you've read recently that really gave you some more confidence to, I know you're trying to control yourself and not spend 40 hours a week researching this, right? But something you've uncovered recently that has really set some light bulbs off for you. So could you just share with the audience what I'm referring to?
Yes. So the writer's name, and forgive me, I'm not very good with Russian pronunciation, is, hold on, I'm just loading it here.
Sure.
Kalizov, Dmitry Kalizov, has a website called 911thology.com, 911thology.com. Somewhere in there he's got an 1,100-page book, which I haven't finished yet, but I did scan for some burning questions that I had to see what he thought about. And now we're jumping to the opening of the door to the very, let's call it the very end, if you will, if you believe what he's got to say. But so the open door starts with, there's something wrong with some aspect of this story. And we're obviously skipping over 20 years of 9/11 truth history and 9/11 research, but there are now various alternate explanations, if you will, by people who have researched the issue. So 9/11 mythology is mostly centered around the idea that the buildings were demolished using nuclear devices. And I don't have the technical knowledge to get into that, but there is forgive me if I completely forgot the name of this guy, but there's a French nuclear researcher who's published a paper doing the calculus of how much energy would be required to pulverize those buildings, and basically come to the conclusion that only nuclear technology could have done that. So there are other people who believe they were demolished in a traditional controlled demolition type of tactic where the buildings are essentially, charges are placed and they're cut at certain points so that they can fall into their own footprint, and that would include all three, the two towers and the building 7. But this guy Kalatozov is a proponent of the theory that they were demolished by underground nuclear explosions. And I don't think it matters whether I believe that or not, because I'm just a person looking into things on my own. I tend to definitely believe in demolition. I understand, for me, how reasonable it sounds it was a nuclear demolition. And there's another aspect to his theory, and he also claims to be an expert in this specific field, this particular author. He actually believes that the buildings were built with nuclear demolition in mind as kind of if it's necessary to demolish them and bring them down in their own footprint for whatever reason, for national security. He thinks that was a common tactic back then, and it's actually used all over the world for militarily important sites. And he claims, and you can read his book rather than just listening to my summary, but he claims that events took place which was set up by people that knew that technology existed, and their objective was to trigger that nuclear demolition of those buildings. So I find it to be an absolutely fascinating theory. I'm open to any theory that makes sense, because the only theory that doesn't make sense is the one they told us on TV.
And you mentioned to me that you remember, during your time in Japan. You may have mentioned this earlier, but I don't think in detail. You received an email, and it was during a time where you wish you would have screenshotted more things, right? But something about a threat coming from Asia, and I know this one is I think purely theoretical for you, but it seems to make sense that maybe all of this was coming from a certain person or group of people in Asia, and the feds were just unable to figure that out. Could you help me clarify where I'm going?
Yes. So this Russian writer's this book, 9/11 Mythology, pinpoints the person that he believes is responsible for organizing 9/11, and I believe the name is Mike Harari. So he was the operations chief of Mossad at that time. I believe on Wikipedia it says he's now passed away several years ago. But what clicked for me as a possible explanation of the U.S. Embassy sending out 2 warnings prior to 9/11 saying American interests would be attacked in Asia was the fact that this guy lived in Bangkok and was so allegedly associated with other bombings pointed, pinned on Al Qaeda because supposedly he was organizing all of this. And I thought, well, that at least is a nexus that kind of makes a little bit of sense. Because I always wondered, why the heck did they say Asia? And again, this doesn't conclusively prove anything. Like I can see the difference between something leading you to a possible explanation versus conclusive proof. And I just will say, absolutely, this is just leading to an explanation. But I always wondered, why did the U.S. Embassy send out messages saying that American interests in Asia would be attacked? And so certainly one possibility is that State Department intelligence picked up on something, didn't quite understand what they were picking up on. And if, in fact, this guy Mike Harari was involved in organizing it and he was doing it from Bangkok, maybe they just made a mistake. And that was, for me, one of the most interesting things for me personally. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny detail, these emails. But for me personally, because I lived it and experienced it, it was something that I thought, well, finally now at least I have a plausible, very broad theory of why these emails were sent out and why they said Asia. So that for me was very interesting, because it's the only answer, or the only plausible or potential answer I ever got.
And I think it's interesting because you refer to it coming out to the masses at the state level, and to Doug's point, Newt Gingrich not really having a clue about Building 7 when he had first mentioned it to him. There's the phrase deep state, right? In your opinion, at this point, like, who is the and I know you'll say, I don't know for sure, I'm still doing my research, which I appreciate, but based on your research to this point, who or what are the puppet masters for all of this?
That's a great question, and I think that's the question where a lot of these things go. And I don't know, and I don't have an answer, and I don't have one group or one country that I can reasonably blame. But I think there is a sort of apparatus, if you will, that has demonstrated its ability to use different countries and different resources at its will. So if this guy, let's say, for example, in this book where Khalazov says that Mike Harari of Mossad operations is responsible, does that mean that the Israeli government or Israeli people or Mossad as an organization, quote, did this? I don't know. I don't think so. I can't imagine somebody pulling this off as an official act of state. And for that same reason, I never believed the phrase inside job. The phrase inside job is meant to have you think that Bush and the U.S. government did it. Well, the U.S. government has, 8 million employees or something? So the U.S. government as one entity did not do this act. And equally likely, another government didn't do it as one entity, as official government policy. And this is just my speculation, in my opinion. It's not worth much more than anybody else's. But that's kind of my take on it. There's some elements that have control over various parts of governments or various entities within governments, and have some ability to plan and pull some things off. And then there's a lot of people that probably had no idea what was going on then, during, or after, and maybe were a part of it, but don't have the big picture, like the same story as Gingrich not knowing about Building 7. Not that he was a part of it, but sorry for kind of rambling on, but I just think that there's a sort of an apparatus, if you will, that is, if decided they want to get something done, then they use what resources they have, and they're not necessarily loyal to any particular country. Certainly you can point to things like the Project for a New American Century, a few years before 9/11, publishing that we need a new Pearl Harbor in order to accomplish whatever foreign policy goals that they thought were appropriate. And so, things like that, but that's very difficult to then blame them, because then there's, without further research, which I haven't done, then there's no concrete proof connecting them. But certainly there's a philosophical connection.
Very, very, I'm eating this up, and I hope everyone else here is too. It looks like they are. Could you remind us, we're starting to wind it down, but it sounds like one of the directions, if people want to go deeper or as deep as you have, was that that website and maybe the book or the article that they can find through it. What was that again? Could you repeat it for our audience?
Absolutely. So that is 9/11 Ufology. That's not associated with me. That's just something that came up through our discussions. And 911THOLOGY.com. Somewhere on there is a way to download a 1,100-page book that this Russian nuclear scientist or Russian nuclear ex-military expert has put together. It's pretty fascinating.
Love it. Well, again, everyone, if you're just tuning in, make sure you definitely catch the replay on this one. It was great. Be sure to hit the retweet button and the like button as we wind it down here. Follow ANCAP Radio. Michael's website is down below. Definitely two great resources to continue to pursue truth in general and on this topic. Michael, where we're at now, what was your biggest takeaway from our conversation today?
Adam, I've really enjoyed this. Thanks for the opportunity. You've got some of the thoughts that were just floating around inside my head, out of my head.
Cool.
I think the most important thing is if you are interested in pursuing truth, and pursue it without letting the potential implications or where it goes affect you. If you find something you think is false or you think is true, and it's interesting to you and you think it matters, I would say go for it. Look into it, research it, and don't let the apparatus that writes the story that the media reads control your thinking. The essence of being an individual, independent thinker is exactly that, is looking into things on your own. And certainly this is a big one, and it doesn't, again, I don't blame anybody that has no interest and doesn't want to go through this type of research. And of course, today you can kind of cheat. There's a lot of people that have just done a lot of things and put together short videos and things like that, so you can get ideas from those. But I would just encourage anybody who's got doubts about something not to bury the doubts.
Fantastic. Michael Roberts, ladies and gentlemen, defeatingglobalism.com. Love that name, love that URL. I guess before we hop off, what's the future of defeatingglobalism.com, Michael?
I think I'm going to write an article. I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but I think I'm going to write an article with an alternate explanation of a very famous writer. I don't want to say any more, but I think that I have come up with a theory that many people have misinterpreted a particular writer who's very famous. That's all I want to say. But I'm going to try to keep the website as just sort of an article here and there about something I've been thinking about or researched about. And it's really just sort of a platform, just a blog platform instead of doing a Substack or something like that.
Love it, love it. And I guess if anyone's looking to buy, sell, or trade a plane, a helicopter, you're the guy to go to for that as well, right?
Absolutely. That's my professional life. These other things are the side intellectual life, which I think both are important.
Love it, love it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for investing your most valuable resource with us here today, your time on ANCAP Radio. We're joined by Michael Roberts of defeatingglobalism.com. Go check out his website in the thread below. Make sure you subscribe to ANCAP Radio updates via email as well. That's all down below. As we continue to build and scale this platform, we really appreciate your listenership, and we're very excited in many regards just getting started. So thank you again. And Michael, thank you.
Thank you so much.